hall had always been a place of reverence, a space built not just for meals but for ceremony. Victor Armand's dining room was the size of a ballroom, with arched windows draped in velvet curtains and a ceiling painted with scenes of ancient battles. The table stretched endlessly, carved from a single block of mahogany imported from Brazil, polished to a shine so smooth, it caught reflections like water. It was here that the millionaire liked to hold court, a stage where he believed himself the king of kings. Tonight was no different, except for the atmosphere, which hung heavy, almost suffocating. The staff knew the signs. The flick of his jeweled hand, the sharpness in his tone, the restless tapping of his fingers on crystal. Victor was in one of his moods. When he reached this boiling point, there was no telling how far the eruption would go. Most nights he confined it to insults and cruel jokes. But there were darker nights too, when plates had been hurled against walls, when servants had left with bruises on their dignity and sometimes on their skin. Tonight, however, the mood was stranger. He had just finished boasting about a deal that had crushed one of his rivals. His voice, thick with whiskey, rattled the chandeliers as he slammed his fist against the table and shouted words that silenced even the air. Neno, si-si-u-piu. The declaration came with such force that the vibrations seemed to travel through the floor itself. Servants froze mid-step. A footman carrying a platter of roasted pheasant nearly dropped it. A maid at the far end of the hall clasped her hands tighter around a tray of crystal glasses, her knuckles paling with the effort. She stood rigid, her dark hair tied back, the plain uniform of service marking her as invisible, unimportant. But she was not invisible to Victor. Elena had been working here for just a few weeks. Another nameless addition to the endless line of employees Victor burned through with careless ease. Most came and went in silence, swallowed by fear of losing a well-paying job. But from the first day, Elena had not blended in the way others did. She worked quickly, with precision, her gaze sharp, her silence deliberate. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was with a kind of clarity that unsettled those who were used to muttered apologies and hushed obedience. The staff whispered that she was different, though none could say exactly how. Victor, however, noticed everything. He noticed the way she avoided looking at him when he demanded attention. He noticed the way her chin tilted ever so slightly higher than the rest, as if she carried something inside her no wealth could buy. Tonight, as his outburst filled the room, his eyes locked on her across the vast table. "Even the maids know better than to breathe when I speak," he barked, his tone half mocking, half threatening. Then, with a cruel smile, he added, "Isn't that right, girl?" The laughter that followed was not real. It was the kind of laughter born out of fear, the sound of people pretending to enjoy a joke so they wouldn't become its target. Forks clinked against plates. The wealthy guests, politicians, businessmen, women adorned with jewels, shifted uncomfortably but dared not intervene. The servants lowered their eyes, wishing they could sink into the floor. But Elena did not laugh. She placed her tray carefully on a nearby sideboard, the silver clinking softly against the glass. The sound carried across the hall, unnervingly loud in the charged silence. Then she straightened. It was such a simple movement, yet it drew every eye. Her back, once bent in the posture of service, now aligned with dignity. She stood taller than any maid should in that hall, her gaze steady as it found Victor's. The air shifted. The chatter died completely. Even the musicians in the corner faltered, their instruments suddenly unsure of whether to continue. It was as though everyone sensed a spark had been struck in a room soaked in gasoline. Victor leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. He had faced boardrooms full of cutthroat executives, rivals who wanted to destroy him, journalists who tried to expose him. He had silenced them all with intimidation, wealth, or sheer volume. But what he saw in Alina's eyes unsettled him in a way he could not name. She was not trembling. She was not bowing her head. She was not playing the part he expected. For the first time in a long while, someone dared to meet his gaze as an equal. Around the table, guests whispered nervously. The butler, an older man who had survived 2 decades in Victor's service, shifted uneasily. His heart hammering in his chest, he knew this was dangerous ground. He wanted to step forward, to draw attention away from Elena before Victor's wrath fell on her. But he also knew, deep in his bones, that to interrupt now would be to deny something bigger than fear. Victor's smile widened, cruel and amused. "What's this?" "The little maid thinks she can look me in the eye. Perhaps you don't know the rules here." Elena's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak. The very thought of it sent a shock through the room. A maid talking back. It was unheard of, impossible, unthinkable. Yet here she was, standing with her hands steady, her eyes unwavering, her silence more powerful than the millionaire's roar. Victor slammed his fist again, a violent punctuation that rattled the crystal glasses and sent a shiver down the spine of every guest. "Say something," he demanded, his voice booming, his chest rising with fury. "Let's hear what you think you know." And in that charged instant, when the world seemed to pause between heartbeats, Elena's silence spoke louder than his rage. It was not fear that held her tongue. It was choice. She wasn't silent because she was powerless. She was silent because she was deciding how and when to break that silence. Victor didn't understand it yet, but the very thing he prided himself on, his command of every room, his ability to dominate with words, was slipping from his grasp. In the eyes of a maid, he had found the one thing money couldn't buy in power, couldn't control. Defiance wrapped in dignity. No one moved. No one dared breathe. The hall, with all its wealth and splendor, had become the stage for something far greater than any of Victor Armand's boasts. A storm was brewing, not of thunder or fire, but of words yet to be spoken. Words that would strike harder than any fist. Words that would leave the mighty millionaire speechless for the first time in his life. The moment stretched, thick with anticipation. And though no one knew exactly what would come next, everyone understood that the night had already changed. Something had shifted in the balance of power. The king at his table had roared, but the girl in the plain uniform had stolen the crown of attention without uttering a single word. Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into slits, a predator realizing too late that its prey might not be prey at all. And Elena, steady as the calm before a storm, finally drew in a breath, her silence about to break.